By the summer of 1944, the war in Europe had reached its most brutal rhythm. The Allied invasion of Normandy was underway, and with every passing day, the Western Front became a graveyard for machines of steel. The fields of France, once quiet and green, were now scorched brown, carved by tank tracks and artillery craters. The thunder of engines never stopped. But beneath the roar of battle, an uncomfortable truth was spreading among American tank crews. The Germans had better tanks. Since North Africa, the M4 Sherman had been the backbone of American armored forces. It was reliable, fast, and simple to produce. Yet in the hedgerows of Normandy, that confidence began to falter. American crews watched their 75mm shells bounce harmlessly off the thick hide of the German Panther and Tiger tanks. The Panther, officially the Panzerkampfwagen IV, was a masterpiece of German engineering, born from the shock of facing Soviet T-34s on the Eastern Front. Its sloped armor, powerful 75mm WWII-42 gun, and fearsome silhouette made it one of the most formidable tanks of the war. In a one-on-one duel, a Sherman rarely stood a chance. Reports from the front were grim. A Sherman needed to flank a Panther to have any hope of destroying it. Even then, it had to close the distance dangerously. In contrast, the Panther could destroy a Sherman at over 1,000 meters. American crews knew it, and so did their commanders. Yet despite this harsh reality, something strange began to emerge in the reports and after-action accounts. Many U.S. tankers who came across captured Panthers refused to use them. To understand why, one must look deeper than firepower and armor, into the very doctrine and mindset that shaped the Sherman's creation. When the United States entered the war, its military doctrine was based on mobility, reliability, and production. The Sherman wasn't designed to fight tanks head-on. It was meant to exploit breakthroughs, support infantry, and advance fast. The belief was simple: let tank destroyers handle enemy armor, while Shermans focused on the battlefield's flow. That idea worked well in theory, until the chaos of real combat erased those lines. In the bocage of Normandy, tank destroyers were often nowhere nearby, and the Sherman found itself forced into duels it was never meant to fight. Crews quickly learned the price of doctrine versus reality. The Sherman earned many nicknames: Tommy Cooker to the British, Ronson to the Germans, and after a lighter, brand that lights first time. Its high gasoline engine and thin armor made it infamous for catching fire when hit. Yet this was only half the story, because for every Sherman that burned, another 5 kept moving. Unlike the heavy German tanks, the Sherman could be repaired, refueled, and returned to battle within hours. Spare parts were everywhere. Its mechanical simplicity meant even a crewman with basic training could keep it running. The Panther, in contrast, was temperamental. Its powerful engine overheated easily, its transmission was fragile, and its complex suspension required constant care. German mechanics struggled to keep it operational even in peacetime conditions, let alone under the mud and chaos of battle. The Americans, in their own pragmatic way, had built a machine for war as it truly was. Not for duels of perfection, but for the grinding, relentless reality of movement, repair, and logistics. And in that truth lay the first clue as to why the Sherman, for all its flaws, was loved, and why many tankers preferred it even when the might of the Panther sat within reach. As the Allies pushed deeper into France, this contrast between perfection and practicality would shape not only the outcome of tank battles, but the entire philosophy of modern warfare. Because while the Panther was a symbol of brilliance, the Sherman was a symbol of endurance. And endurance, in the long war of attrition that was World War II, was the deadlier weapon. When the German Panther first appeared on the Eastern Front in 1943, it sent shockwaves through Allied intelligence. Its armor, sloped like the Soviet T-34 but thicker, could deflect shells that would rip through most tanks of the era. Its gun, the high-velocity 75mm WWII-42 L-70, could pierce any Allied vehicle at distances beyond a kilometer. To Allied observers, it seemed like a weapon from the future, but that future came with a price. The Panther was a triumph of precision engineering, and precision was not a friend of war. Each tank required an immense number of man-hours to build. Its Maybach engine demanded constant maintenance. Tracks jammed in mud, Final drives cracked under strain. Even before seeing combat, nearly half the Panthers sent to Kursk broke down en route. The machine was powerful but fragile, a racehorse forced to run through swamps. The Americans watched and learned. Their own philosophy remained focused on what the industrial giant across the Atlantic could do best: mass production. The Sherman could be built in numbers that dwarfed German capacity. By 1944, factories in the United States were rolling out nearly 2,000 Shermans a month, more than the total number of Panthers ever produced during the entire war. The difference was not only industrial, it was strategic. German tank design had evolved from a belief in technological dominance, that superior machines could win the war. American and Soviet doctrine, shaped by vast supply chains and global logistics, saw victory in quantity, coordination, and movement. The United States could lose tanks and still keep fighting. Germany could not. This disparity became evident as the Allies advanced through France. For every Panther that prowled the hedgerows, 10 Shermans moved across the fields. When one was hit, the others pressed forward, supported by artillery, infantry, and air power. The Germans called the Sherman Panzer IV, an insult suggesting it was barely a match for their medium tanks. Yet its persistence wore them down. Still, to the men inside, that persistence had a cost. Many crews entered combat fully aware of their disadvantage. They had read the reports, heard the stories, and seen what a single Panther could do to an entire platoon. Yet when American forces occasionally captured a German tank, a rare prize after a mechanical breakdown or a hasty retreat, something curious happened. Most refused to use it. The reasons were practical as much as psychological. German tanks required special fuel, unique tools, and spare parts no Allied supply line could provide. Their complex gearboxes demanded experience. Even trained German crews found them temperamental. A captured Panther might look intimidating, but it was often a liability. There was also trust, or rather the lack of it. American crews trusted the Sherman. They knew its sounds, its limits, the feel of its engine beneath their boots. They knew how far it could push before overheating, how fast it could pivot under fire, how much punishment it could take before dying. The Panther was an unknown beast. Powerful, yes, but unpredictable. To a tanker, predictability was survival. Commanders understood this well. Orders discouraged using captured tanks, fearing confusion in battle. The silhouettes of German armor were instantly recognized and targeted. In the fog of war, friendly fire was a constant threat. A Sherman crew in a Panther shell could end up destroyed by their own side before ever firing a shot. So they stayed in their death traps. They fought not with illusions of superiority, but with discipline, coordination, and numbers. By late 1944, the contrast between these two philosophies, German perfection versus American practicality, had become one of the defining symbols of the war. The Panther, sleek and deadly, embodied a nation obsessed with engineering mastery. The Sherman, boxy and humble, represented a system built for endurance and adaptability. And as the armies converged in the decisive months of 1944, this clash of design and doctrine would explode in the fields of Lorraine, where a handful of American Shermans would meet a force of German Panthers in a battle that defied every expectation. The stage was set for the confrontation that would test not just mettle, but mindset. For the American tanker, the Sherman was both a home and a coffin. Inside, space was suffocating. Just inches separated man from machine. The air stank of oil, sweat, and cordite. When the gun fired, the entire hull shuddered like a struck bell. Every vibration was a reminder that one well-placed German shell could end everything. Crews nicknamed their tanks coffins for 5 brothers. They joked darkly because humor was armor of another kind. The fear was real. They had seen what a Panther's gun could do. A single hit could turn a Sherman into a fireball, the gasoline engine igniting instantly. Survivors often recalled the screams of trapped comrades as flames filled the compartment. And yet they climbed back in. Every day, because despite the danger, the Sherman worked. Its controls were responsive, its turret fast to turn, its radio clear. It started in the morning without a fight. To a soldier who had to fight day after day, predictability was a form of mercy. Tankers formed deep bonds with their machines. They gave them names: Thunderbolt, Killer, Sweet Sue, Fury. Each name carried a quiet defiance, a human fingerprint on cold steel. Many crews painted personal insignias, symbols of identity in a war that consumed individuality. When they saw a panther burning, it was a strange comfort, not because they underestimated it, but because they knew that even the mighty could fail. The panther might dominate in a duel, but it could not dominate every day, not in the mud, not in the rain, not when it broke down 3 miles short of the fight. The Sherman, fragile as it seemed, always brought its men home, or at least gave them a fighting chance to get there. That reliability built a trust deeper than statistics could measure. In war, it wasn't the strongest weapon that mattered most. It was the one you could count on when everything else fell apart. American tank warfare was never about single duels. It was about systems, tactics, coordination, and teamwork. By mid-1944, U.S. armored units had perfected a doctrine that turned the Sherman's weaknesses into advantages. They fought as hunter packs, never alone. When facing German armor, the goal was to outmaneuver, not outgun. One platoon would pin the enemy. Another would flank. Artillery and air support were always just a radio call away. The Sherman's agility and turret rotation, 360 degrees in under 15 seconds, allowed rapid response. Panthers, by contrast, rotated their heavy turrets slowly, often requiring the entire tank to turn. This difference, subtle on paper, became life or death in the field. American tankers learned to exploit terrain. They struck from cover, ambushed from ridges, and used smoke shells to mask movement. When facing Panthers head-on, they aimed for the vulnerable sides or rear, the thin armor around the engine. In many battles, the outcome depended not on firepower but on seconds of positioning. And then there was air power, the unspoken partner. Allied fighter bombers like the P-47 Thunderbolt and Typhoon prowled the skies. Once German armor was spotted, radio operators called in strikes that could obliterate entire formations. The Panther's armor meant little when a 500-pound bomb struck its roof. What the Germans saw as unfair, the Americans saw as combined arms. The tank was one instrument in a symphony of war, coordinated, flexible, and devastating. German tank aces, often lionized in post-war myths, fought isolated battles. American tankers fought together. It was this integration, the seamless choreography between tank, infantry, artillery, and air, that allowed Shermans to win engagements they should have lost. In that system, reliability and speed mattered more than armor thickness. Because when the fight depended on coordination, a machine that could move and communicate was worth more than one that could only shoot. On paper, the Sherman was inferior. But war isn't fought on paper. Its armor was just enough, 50 mm at first, later improved with welded plates or sandbags. Its 75mm gun was modest but effective against soft targets and bunkers. And its later versions, like the M4A3E8 Easy 8, carried the improved 76mm gun capable of piercing Panthers at closer range. Yet, its real strength was invisible, engineering simplicity. The Sherman was built for maintenance in the field. Engines could be swapped in hours. Tracks could be repaired with common tools. Spare parts were standardized across models, a revolutionary idea at the time. The transmission was smooth, forgiving even to inexperienced drivers. Its radial aircraft engine, though gasoline-powered, was dependable in all climates. Many Shermans crossed thousands of miles without breakdowns that would have crippled German tanks. In contrast, the Panther's complexity was both its genius and its curse. Its overlapping road wheels clogged with mud and ice. Its high-precision components required skilled mechanics and parts that Germany increasingly couldn't produce. A broken Panther could be out of service for days. A damaged Sherman might be repaired overnight. The Americans also mastered what the Germans never could: logistics as a weapon. The Red Ball Express, a massive truck convoy system, kept frontline units constantly supplied with food, ammunition, and spare parts. Shermans that were disabled one day often returned to battle the next. To the Germans, this was infuriating. They could destroy 10 tanks and find 20 more by morning. In the cold logic of industrial war, perfection was a weakness. The Panther represented a craftsman's pride. The Sherman represented a factory's relentlessness. And in 20th century warfare, relentlessness wins. Each angle revealed a different truth: the human courage, the tactical discipline, the mechanical philosophy. all intertwined in one machine that defied its reputation. But beyond the American perspective lay another side of the story: the German crews, the moral burden, and the unseen logistics war that raged beneath the surface. To most Allied tankers, the German Panther was the predator of the battlefield, elegant, fast, and deadly. But inside its steel frame, German crews faced a far harsher truth. By late 1944, the Wehrmacht was running on fumes. Fuel shortages crippled mobility, and spare parts were nearly impossible to find. Panthers often traveled fewer than 150 kilometers before suffering mechanical failure. Even when operational, many units couldn't move for lack of fuel. The tankers stranded, waiting, vulnerable. German crewmen respected their machines but feared them as well. The Panther's engine overheated easily. Fires were common even without enemy fire. The intricate suspension, designed for smooth ride quality, jammed with mud in the French countryside. To start the tank in freezing weather often required multiple crews working together, one Panther towing another just to ignite the reluctant Maybach engine. Maintenance consumed more time than combat. Reports from frontline units reveal that entire Panther companies entered battle with fewer than half their tanks running. Commanders spoke bitterly of steel lions with broken legs. To make matters worse, German supply lines were collapsing. Replacement tracks, transmissions, and fuel drums were stranded hundreds of kilometers behind the front. A disabled tank was usually abandoned or destroyed by its own crew to prevent capture. Panther crews envied the Americans not for their armor, but for their consistency. The Sherman might not dominate in firepower, but it showed up. It moved when ordered. It started each morning without a fight. As one German officer lamented after the war, "Our tanks were better, but their system was perfect." That system of fuel, repair, and replacement would prove the invisible weapon that broke the back of the German armored force. There was a moral dimension to this story, one rarely spoken but deeply felt among those who lived it. American crews knew they were outgunned. They entered every battle aware that a Panther or Tiger could destroy them before they even came within firing range. And yet they fought, not out of ignorance but resolve. Courage in war is rarely about confidence. It is about action despite knowing the odds. Every Sherman crew that rolled into combat carried that knowledge like a weight in their gut. They fought with instinct, training, and trust in each other. Survival often depended on teamwork. When one Sherman was hit, the others didn't retreat. They maneuvered, they flanked, they avenged. Crews risked fire and explosion to pull wounded comrades from burning wrecks. Many earned medals not for killing the enemy, but for saving their own under impossible conditions. This unspoken brotherhood became the moral core of America's armored force. By contrast, the German tank corps, once elite and proud, was breaking under exhaustion and disillusionment. Young, inexperienced crews replaced the veterans lost in Russia. The Panther's power could not compensate for collapsing morale or the crushing weight of Allied air superiority. In that contrast lay a powerful truth. The Sherman's weakness demanded courage, and courage built unity. The Panther's superiority, by isolating its crews within their machines, created arrogance and distance. One produced resilience, the other, despair. That difference could not be measured in armor thickness or gun caliber, but it showed in how men endured the war's end. While tanks clashed on the fields, another war raged silently behind the lines, a war of fuel, factories, and infrastructure. The United States fought that war like no nation before it. The American logistical network in 1944 was an engineering marvel, a moving city of men and machines, feeding the front with everything from shells to chocolate bars. Central to this machine was the Red Ball Express, a 24-hour convoy system stretching from Normandy's beaches to the advancing front lines. Thousands of trucks roared down dirt roads, delivering millions of gallons of fuel, ammunition, and replacement parts. If a Sherman broke down, its replacement could arrive within days. This system meant that American units rarely stopped. A division could lose half its tanks in a day and still fight tomorrow. In contrast, German armored divisions often disintegrated not from enemy fire, but from lack of supplies. The Panther's sophisticated parts required factories that were now under constant Allied bombing. Each destroyed rail line, each missing gear, was a slow death sentence for the German war machine. The Sherman thrived in this environment because it was designed for it. Standardized components meant repair crews could cannibalize parts from one tank to fix another. Field depots turned damaged Shermans into serviceable ones overnight. Mechanics became as vital as gunners. This logistical dominance wasn't glamorous, but it was decisive. While Germany poured resources into perfecting fewer machines, America perfected the system that sustained them. It was not the Sherman's gun or armor that won the war. It was the relentless supply chain that kept them rolling, one after another, across a continent. These angles together revealed a deeper truth of the Second World War. Victory did not belong to the tank with the thickest armor or the longest gun. It belonged to the one that embodied endurance, of machine, of system, and of the men who fought within it. And soon, that endurance would face its greatest test, in the muddy fields of Lorraine, where outnumbered Shermans would meet a storm of Panthers head-on. Lorraine, France, September 1944. The summer heat had faded into gray skies and cold rain. The land around the small French town of Harcourt turned into a swamp of mud and shattered hedgerows. Visibility was low, the air heavy with mist and diesel fumes. For the men of the U.S. 4th Armored Division, the war had become a series of exhausting advances. Villages captured, lost, then captured again. But what was coming would test them in a way no battle had before. In early September, the German High Command launched a desperate counteroffensive in Lorraine. Nearly 200 Panther and Panzer IV tanks from the 5th Panzer Army rolled toward the thin American lines. Their goal, smash through the 4th Armored Division, retake Nancy, and halt Patton's advance into Germany. To the Americans, it was chaos. The enemy had returned in force, fast, coordinated, and deadly. Yet unlike in Normandy, the Americans now fought on open ground with room to maneuver. And in the open, the Sherman could breathe. Colonel Bruce C. Clark, commanding Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division, organized his defense like a chess player anticipating every move. He spread his Shermans thin but mobile, always shifting, always repositioning. Instead of meeting the German armor head-on, Clark ordered ambushes, concealment, and coordinated artillery fire. His tankers dug into the fog, waiting. At dawn on September 19th, the mist lifted just enough for the silhouettes of Panthers to appear across the ridge. They advanced confidently, long guns sweeping the horizon. The Germans expected panic. Instead, the first volley of American shells screamed through the fog, striking flanks and engine compartments. The Shermans were firing from hidden positions. Their gunners had practiced these shots for months. Fire, move, fire again. Each hit might not destroy a Panther outright, but it disrupted the advance, broke formation, and drew German eyes away from the real threat. Then, the artillery began. American observers, relaying coordinates through the radio network, blanketed the advancing Panthers with high explosive fire. Mud and debris rained down, engines sputtered, and tracks broke loose. German tankers, unable to spot their hidden enemy, began to panic. By noon, Clark ordered his tanks to counterattack. Sherman surged forward through the haze in coordinated platoons, 3 abreast, moving fast. They flanked, circled, and used speed as a weapon. When a Panther fired, it exposed its position, and in seconds, half a dozen Shermans returned fire. A single Panther could kill a Sherman with one shot. But the Americans didn't come one by one. They came in waves. The battlefield turned into a deadly rhythm. Panthers fired, hit, then jammed their turrets trying to track fast-moving Shermans. The Shermans, smaller and more agile, closed distance and fired point-blank into the Panther's side armor, where even a 76mm shell could punch through. The Germans had the better machines, but the Americans had better tempo. Every hour, new Shermans rolled in from rear depots, refueled and ready. Meanwhile, Panthers bogged down or ran out of ammunition. Many simply stopped moving, not destroyed, but useless. By the end of the first day, the battlefield was littered with burning armor. The smell of cordite and diesel hung in the air like fog. One American tanker later recalled, "They had the best tanks money could build, but they couldn't keep them running long enough to matter." As night fell, Clark's men held their ground. Radio chatter filled the dark. Broken voices calling for resupply, repair crews working by flashlight, medics dragging the wounded to cover. The German offensive had failed to break through. But they were not done yet. Reinforcements were coming, and the next morning, another armored wave would roll toward Aracore, determined to crush what they saw as inferior tanks manned by overconfident men. What they didn't know was that those inferior tanks were about to deliver one of the most humiliating defeats the German Panzer Corps would ever experience. Because at Aracore, the Sherman wasn't just a tank. It was part of a living organism, a network of fuel trucks, artillery batteries, engineers, and air support, all synchronized through one doctrine: keep moving, keep fighting. And in that doctrine lay the hidden power of American armor. September 20th, 1944. Aracore, France. The fog returned thicker than before, blanketing the fields in pale silence. Visibility dropped to less than 50 meters. Perfect cover for tanks, and both sides knew it. At dawn, the Germans attacked again. Nearly 90 Panthers and Panzer IVs from the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades moved in tight formation, their turrets swiveling slowly through the mist. They had learned from yesterday's chaos, or so they thought. Their orders were clear: drive straight through the American positions, crush the resistance before air power could intervene. But the Americans were ready. Hidden behind hedgerows, barns, and shell craters, Sherman crews waited with engines idling low. Tank commanders peered through periscopes, straining their eyes against the fog. It was a duel of nerves. Who would see first? Who would shoot first? At 700 hours, the silence broke. A Panther appeared out of the mist barely 200 yards away, its massive gun cutting through the haze. A Sherman gunner, calm and methodical, fired first. The shell struck the Panther's side plate. The German tank erupted in flames, lighting up the morning gray. That single explosion shattered the stillness, and the battlefield ignited once more. From multiple angles, the Americans struck. They didn't fight head-on. They danced around the Panthers, darting through cover, firing, retreating, reappearing elsewhere. The Panthers tried to respond, but their turrets turned too slowly, their vision too narrow. Every few minutes, artillery from the 191st Field Artillery Battalion pounded German positions, coordinated perfectly through radio. Forward observers, often just infantrymen with binoculars, guided shells with deadly precision. The ground trembled as high explosives ripped through the fog. The Panther's greatest strength, its long-range gun, was now useless in this close, shifting chaos. Visibility made distance fighting impossible. What mattered was speed, communication, and adaptability, qualities the Sherman had in abundance. When the fog finally lifted later that morning, the Americans called in their deadliest ally, the skies. P-47, thunderbolts screamed overhead, diving low over the battlefield. Rockets streaked downward, slamming into German armor columns. Panthers tried to retreat into tree lines, but the open terrain offered little shelter. Pilots later described it as a shooting gallery. By afternoon, the German attack had collapsed. Dozens of Panthers lay smoking, their long barrels bent and broken. Some were destroyed by direct hits, others abandoned after mechanical failures or fuel shortages. The numbers told a stunning story. Over 9 days of fighting, the U.S. 4th Armored Division, outnumbered and outgunned, destroyed more than 250 German tanks and armored vehicles, while losing fewer than 30 Shermans. Historians would later call it one of the most lopsided armored victories of the war. But for the men who lived it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival. Tank Commander Lieutenant Albin Irzik recalled, "We weren't thinking about statistics. We were just trying to stay alive. Every battle was a blur. Fire, smoke, shouting, and then silence. You'd look around and half the tanks you started with were gone. Then the next morning replacements rolled in and we went again." That was the essence of the Sherman war machine. Endurance through replacement, continuity through logistics. When one tank fell, another took its place. When one crew was lost, another climbed into the same seat in the same model with the same tools. German commanders were stunned. Their elite brigades, filled with the newest Panthers and veteran officers, had been shattered not by superior firepower, but by an enemy that refused to fight by the expected rules. Major General Hasso von Manteuffel, one of Germany's most respected panzer leaders, later analyzed the defeat with painful honesty. The Americans fought intelligently, They used the terrain, their artillery, and the air. Our tanks were superior. Yes, but the enemy's system was better. That system, the combination of doctrine, communication, and logistics, was the true weapon of the Allied armored force. Ericourt became more than just a battlefield victory. It was proof of concept that a well-coordinated, reliable, inferior machine could overcome superior design through strategy and endurance, and it shattered one of the great myths of the war, that technological superiority guarantees success. When the smoke cleared, the muddy fields of Lorraine were littered with burned-out Panthers. Many had been abandoned without firing a single round, crippled by mechanical failures or lack of fuel. The Sherman losses were quickly replaced, their wrecks towed away, their parts salvaged, their names repainted on new hulls. The German survivors retreated east. Their superior tanks had failed not because they were weak, but because they were alone, unmatched by the industrial, logistical, and tactical machinery behind the Shermans. Ericourt was not just a turning point in armor warfare. It was the moment the myth of German invincibility began to die, and the truth of modern war came into focus. Reliability, coordination, and numbers could defeat brilliance. And from that moment onward, American tankers never again saw their Shermans as death traps. They saw them for what they truly were, survivors. When the guns finally fell silent around Ericourt, the landscape looked less like a battlefield and more like a graveyard of iron. Charred tanks lay scattered across the French countryside. Hulks of Panthers, Panzers, and Shermans all burned into the same shade of ash gray. The air smelled of oil and wet soil. Farmers would later say it took years before the ground grew clean again. But for the U.S. Army, this ruined field told a powerful story. The German counterattack, once expected to shatter the Allied advance toward Germany, had failed catastrophically. Nearly every operational tank of the 5th Panzer Army's newly formed brigades was destroyed or abandoned. The American 4th Armored Division, though battered, still stood ready for combat, its losses replenished within days. The numbers spoke volumes. Out of nearly 250 German armored vehicles committed to the Ericourt offensive, less than 60 made it back across the Moselle River. The Americans lost around 30 Shermans, but most were quickly replaced, repaired, or salvaged for parts. Within a week, their armored battalions were again at full strength. This was not luck. It was the result of a system, a machine built not just from metal but from planning, discipline, and scale. The Sherman's greatest weapon had never been its gun or armor. It was the logistics behind it. While German tank crews waited weeks for replacement parts, or months for new vehicles, the Americans operated an industrial miracle. Trains, ships, and convoys brought a constant stream of tanks, fuel, ammunition, and food to the front. If a Sherman broke down, another was waiting. If a crew was lost, another was trained and ready. The U.S. Army's maintenance and recovery units worked like surgeons. Teams known as tread doctors roamed battlefields, salvaging wrecks under fire. Engines were swapped in hours. Turrets were replaced overnight. The goal was simple: keep the machines rolling no matter what. German Panther crews didn't have that luxury. Even when a Panther survived battle, it often became useless within days. Its transmission failed. Its tracks snapped. Its engine overheated. And when it did, recovery was nearly impossible. The vehicle was too heavy for most tow trucks and spare parts were scarce. Many were destroyed by their own crews just to prevent capture. That's why American soldiers began to respect, even love, their death trap. To them, the Sherman was a friend that might not protect them from every hit, but would always be there for the next fight. It started in the morning. It moved through mud. It crossed bridges without collapsing them, and it could travel hundreds of miles without breaking down. Tank Commander Sergeant Joe D. Stout once said, "Sure, the Krauts had better tanks, but ours were there when we needed them. Their big cats were stuck in the woods. Ours were on the road to Germany." That simple difference, availability, changed the course of armored warfare. As the Allies advanced through France and into the Low Countries, Shermans became the unstoppable tide of the Western Front. They filled roads, fields, and villages in endless columns, a moving wall of steel and dust. German commanders called it the swarm. Every destroyed Panther was irreplaceable. Every lost Sherman was a statistic, not a tragedy, because another would arrive tomorrow. The myth of inferior tanks began to fade in the minds of those who fought in them. By late 1944, many crews began customizing their Shermans with names, artwork, and even armor modifications. They welded spare track links to the hull, added sandbags to the front, and covered weak points with concrete. The Sherman became personal, a machine that reflected the men inside it. It was not perfect. It never was. But it was theirs. And in war, trust between man and machine means more than perfection on paper. As the autumn of 1944 turned to winter, the lessons of Harcourt echoed through every armored division in Europe. Reports flowed back to Allied headquarters, each confirming the same truth. The Panther was superior on the drawing board, but the Sherman was superior in the war. The U.S. Army analyzed the wrecks of captured Panthers and Tigers with fascination. Engineers admired their engineering, the precision machining, the long guns, the sloped armor, yet they noted one consistent weakness: over-engineering. The Panther was a masterpiece of design but a nightmare of practicality. It took nearly 150,000 man-hours to produce one, compared to 40,000 for a Sherman. Even when Germany managed to roll them out, fuel shortages and transport bottlenecks ensured many never reached the front. Meanwhile, American factories, from Detroit to Cleveland, worked without pause. They built nearly 50,000 Shermans by war's end. Every one of them used standardized parts, interchangeable components, and assembly line simplicity. This mass production didn't just mean more tanks, it meant a global ecosystem. American industry supported not only U.S. forces, but also the British, Canadians, and even Free French units, all fighting in the same machines. That unity created efficiency beyond imagination. If a Sherman was damaged in Normandy, its parts could be replaced with pieces from a unit in Italy or Belgium. Mechanics didn't need to learn 5 different systems. They mastered one. It was the embodiment of modern warfare: mobility, modularity, and adaptability. The German approach, by contrast, reflected a dying philosophy, one that valued perfection over practicality. By the end of 1944, German commanders faced a cruel paradox. Their tanks were too good to produce in numbers, too heavy to maintain, and too complex to repair. Their own tankers, once proud of their machines, began to envy the Americans for their simplicity. Captured Panther driver Obergefreiter Kurt Franke confessed during interrogation, "We feared your Shermans because they kept coming. For every one we destroyed, 5 more appeared." The Panther was strong, but it was alone. That word, alone, summed up the German problem. The Panther was built for a perfect war, fought under perfect conditions, by an army that no longer existed. The Sherman was built for real war, messy, unpredictable, and relentless. After Harcourt, the U.S. Army's confidence in its armor doctrine solidified. Commanders pushed deeper into Germany with an aggressive philosophy: mobility over confrontation. Shermans avoided static duels and instead worked with infantry, artillery, and air support, the combined arms formula that crushed the Wehrmacht. By spring 1945, that formula had done its job. The once mighty German Panzer Corps lay in ruins. Panthers and Tigers, once symbols of dominance, now rusted along roadsides or smoldered in city ruins. In Berlin, Soviet tankers faced many of the same challenges the Americans had overcome months earlier. The Red Army's T-34, another fast, reliable, mass-produced machine, overwhelmed the Panthers by sheer coordination and quantity. History, it seemed, had chosen its victor, not the most powerful, but the most sustainable. When the war ended, American crews looked back on their Shermans with unexpected affection. They remembered the heat inside, the deafening roar, the thin armor that too often failed, but also the reliability, the teamwork, and the knowledge that they were never alone. Many veterans later said that surviving the war inside a Sherman wasn't about having the best tank. It was about trusting the one they had. In post-war interviews, U.S. Tank Commander Captain Belton Y. Cooper, author of Death Traps, admitted his early frustration with the Sherman's vulnerability. Yet even he later conceded that the vehicle's sheer reliability and production scale won the war. That was the paradox of the Sherman, hated in the moment, honored in hindsight. Its thin armor and small gun didn't make it a hero. Its persistence did. And when the final tank battles of World War II were written into history, one truth stood eternal. The Sherman didn't just win because it was good, it won because it was enough. In the cold silence after the war, as the world rebuilt from ashes, the debate over tanks, over Panthers and Shermans, power and practicality slowly faded into something deeper. The Sherman was never the hero of romantic myth. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't terrifying. It was ordinary, and that was its strength. Where the Panther embodied Germany's obsession with perfection, the Sherman represented something entirely different: adaptability, endurance, and the will to keep moving forward. It was the tank of a democracy, simple enough for a farmhand to drive, cheap enough for a nation to mass produce, and reliable enough to cross continents. It reflected the people who built it and the soldiers who fought in it, men who knew they weren't invincible, but refused to stop. For every Sherman that burned, another rolled forward. For every crew that fell, another climbed inside the same machine. The Germans called it mechanical mediocrity. History called it victory. The Panther, magnificent yet fragile, became a relic of an idea: that wars are won by brilliance. The Sherman, clumsy yet immortal, became proof of a harder truth: that wars are won by consistency, cooperation, and courage, even decades later. When historians and veterans gather to remember, the stories always sound the same. They don't speak of horsepower or millimeters of armor. They speak of dust, sweat, broken tracks, laughter in the dark, and a rumbling engine that refused to quit. Because in the end, the Sherman wasn't just a tank. It was a message: that resilience defeats perfection, and that progress is built not from greatness, but from the determination to keep going, no matter how rough the road. And on the battlefields of France, Belgium, and beyond, where the rusting hulks still lie beneath the grass, that lesson endures, written in steel, oil, and sacrifice. The Panther may have been the predator, but the Sherman was the survivor, and in war, survival wins.